What Anthony Albanese has done today shames our nation and it imperils us. It will be politically popular with the hard left, with some Muslim communities, and with those who don't pay attention to what's really going on. It'll be cheered by the radical anti-Israel and anti-US activists so prevalent on Western university campuses. But in the cold, hard light of day, this is another example of the West revelling in self-harm and bowing to its enemies. This rewards terrorism. It demonises Israel, and it devalues the core principles of freedom, democracy and the rule of law, so crucial to Western liberal democracies, and I thought, our national values. In fact, this gives Hamas exactly what it wanted when it slaughtered families, raped women, massacred innocent children, defiled bodies, and took hostages 22 long months ago. And when I say it gives Hamas exactly what it wanted, I don't mean recognition of a Palestinian state, of course. That's not what Hamas wants. Hamas wants the demonisation of Israel. That's why it deliberately triggered a war that it knew it couldn't win. Hamas wants the world to turn against Israel so that it can advance its long-term aim of eliminating Israel and eradicating the Jewish people. That's what they say, believe what they say, and watch what they do. Now, Australia and a bunch of other soft-minded and weak-kneed nations are demonising Israel with this recognition move, and the terrorists of Hamas will applaud them at every turn.
Today I can confirm that at the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly in September, Australia will recognise the state of Palestine.
Recognise what state? There is no state. There is nothing approaching a state. There are no settled borders. There's no effective political system, no democracy, no rule of law. So the entire push is really about recognising an aim, a dream, a fantasy that is completely disconnected from reality, and doing it in a way, as a way really of just opposing Israel.
Australia will recognise the state of Palestine. Australia will recognise the right of the Palestinian people to a state of their own, predicated on the commitments Australia has received from the Palestinian Authority.
Oh, so he's recognising the right to form a state, and he's received commitments from the Palestinian Authority. In other words, he's received assurances from the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, a man who is 20 years into a 4-year term. Yeah, that's right. That's how democratic the Palestinian Authority is. Abbas was elected to a 4-year term in 2005, and he's still there without the inconvenience of elections. And Abbas, like previous Palestinian leaders, was offered a two-state solution way back in 2008, and he chose not to accept it. But Albo reckons Abbas will deliver it now because of commitments. And what would these commitments be?
Our government has made it clear that there can be no role for the terrorists of Hamas in any future Palestinian state. This is one of the commitments Australia has sought and received from President Abbas and the Palestinian Authority.
Oh, really? Hamas will have no role in this. Sounds nice, doesn't it? But Hamas controls the Gaza Strip, where 2 million Palestinians, close to half the Palestinian population, lives. So how can Albo and all these other geniuses guarantee no future role for Hamas unless Hamas is defeated? This is one of the core absurdities of this whole push. They're demanding that Israel stops pursuing Hamas. They want a ceasefire to stop the military action against Hamas, but they say they can form a country without having Hamas playing a role. You have to have a plan to dismantle Hamas, otherwise you're going to just pretend that Hamas has gone away and you're going to be cultivating disaster. Besides, the issue is not so much Hamas as an entity, but Islamist extremist terrorism as an ideology. Albanese makes no attempt to de-link his actions from the horrors of October the 7th.
Ever since the atrocities perpetrated by Hamas on the 7th of October 2023, Australia has stood with the people of Israel and our partners and allies around the world in calling for the release of the hostages. For the sake of their loved ones and all who share in their pain, we repeat that call today.
Again, how can he say this? He is rewarding Hamas for taking hostages. So how does that help those hostages now or other hostages into the future? This diplomacy encourages hostage taking. Think of the Bibas family, Mother Cherie and her few beautiful boys Ariel and Kafir, taken during that murderous rampage of October the 7th, held in fear and killed as hostages in the tunnels of Gaza. How could we communicate to them and their families that the reaction all these months later is not to make sure others are not taken, not to force Hamas to hand over the remaining hostages, but to betray their memories by trying to assuage the terrorist savages who not only took them and slaughtered them, but then handed over their bodies in a grotesque ceremony. Look at this, the sickening victory theatre of the Hamas terrorists. It is just so sad and infuriating. Yet listen to this from Albanese today.
The Palestinian Authority has reaffirmed it recognises Israel's right to exist in peace and security. It has committed to demilitarise and to hold general elections. It has pledged to abolish the system of payments to the families of prisoners and martyrs.
He called them martyrs. Our own Prime Minister called Palestinian terrorists, suicide bombers and the like, martyrs. If that doesn't show you how low we have sunk, I don't know what could. Just imagine if the international community had stood firmly behind Israel and against Hamas from the start. Would hostages still be held? Would the war still be going? We'll never know. But we do know that what shifted so many politicians, including by his own admission, Anthony Albanese, is the public protests and, of course, sparked by the concerns about the devastation in Gaza, which is obviously terrible. But, of course, it's communicated primarily to us through Hamas-controlled information, which has often been shown to be staged and exaggerated. It's propaganda. All people of goodwill want civilians protected and saved. That goes without saying. And we all want peace. The question is how to deliver that. And appeasing Hamas is the wrong strategy. Ignoring hatred is a huge mistake. Think of this Muslim leader in Sydney on October the 8th, 2023, 22 months ago now. He celebrated the slaughter of 1,200 Israeli men, women and children, even while their bodies were still being recovered and even while the injured were being treated. And he did this celebration with a group on the streets of Sydney, even while the 250 hostages were still being raped and murdered. Yet just over a week ago, that same man, Sheikh Ibrahim Dadoun, joined the protests on the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and he said this.
We stand on the Harbour Bridge on an iconic day when we are protesting, we're marching for humanity.
So really, you rejoice at the slaughter of Israelis, but then you march for humanity. Yet our government has bought these arguments from activists like this. Now, do I support a Palestinian state? A state where Palestinian people live in peace, freedom and security alongside Israel, whose security is also guaranteed? Of course I do. But it's so far from reality now that it's ludicrous to even talk about it, let alone recognise it. Under current arrangements with the Palestinian territories run by Hamas, Fatah, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah and others, a Palestinian state would most closely resemble the caliphate established by Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. It would be an Islamist terrorist badland, much like Gaza today, where the rights of women, gays and non-believers would be non-existent, where democracy would be a sham, and where the ultimate goal would remain the annihilation of Israel and the eradication of the Jewish people. And its borders would snake through the suburbs of Jerusalem. Before Israel can allow such a state, a Palestinian state, it needs to be demonstrated that that state would be free, open, secure and peaceful. And such an arrangement is less plausible now than it has been for at least 2 decades. Every time the Palestinian Arabs have been offered a state, they have chosen war instead. That is the sad fact of history. In 1948, then again in the 1960s, in the 1970s, again at the turn of the century when Bill Clinton brokered a deal that was rejected by Yasser Arafat. And when Abbas didn't take up that offer again in 2008. And then when Gaza was handed over 2 decades ago, it prompted not peace but years of missile attacks into Israel, years of foreign aid being tipped into weapons and tunnels, and the vile atrocities that led to on October the 7th. Yet now, while Hamas is still fighting Israel from Gaza, while Hamas still commits the daily war crime of holding 50 hostages, 30 of them dead, 20 believed to be still alive, now Australia decides to recognise a Palestinian state. It's a decision as repugnant as it is absurd. It's as morally depraved as it is diplomatically impotent. It is recognition of an imaginary state in order to portray Israel as evil. It's done largely for domestic political purposes, to appease the Islamist hardliners and the radical leftists who constantly attack and protest against Israel. It's a very sad day for Australian diplomacy, a tragic day for our national values, which now lay abandoned as a Green left government seeks to appease the radical Islamists. It's a terrible day for relations between Australia and Israel, turning a long and fruitful friendship into an estrangement at best. And if you want a more hard-headed and practical assessment of the damage to our nation, think about the US alliance. There's no relationship more important for our own defence and security. The alliance is already under strain, and yet now Australia joins an anti-Israel and anti-US diplomatic push. It'll do nothing to help the Palestinian people. It's just another propaganda win for the Hamas terrorists that will prolong the war. It further diminishes Australia and it undermines the US alliance. There's every chance now that Albanese will meet Mahmoud Abbas in the flesh before he meets the US President Donald Trump. It's a sickening day for Australia and confirmation that the Albanese Labor government is changing this country quite dramatically, quite quickly, and all for the worse.